I'm going to give you one more opportunity to remove that before I hold you in contempt." The voice came from behind the bench like a gavel falling before the gavel had been raised. Flat, tight, constructed from the particular granite that forms in men who have held uncontested authority long enough to mistake it for something they deserve. Judge Warren Cahill was 54 years old, a former county prosecutor, and had presided over the 43rd District Court of Ohio for 11 years without anyone meaningfully disagreeing with him twice. He leaned forward now with the practiced patience of a man who had learned that patience, when worn as a weapon, lands harder than anger. The man standing at the plaintiff's table did not move. His name was Roy Dunham, and he was 83 years old. He wore a gray wool suit that had been bought in a different decade and pressed this morning with the kind of care that old men apply to things they respect. His shirt was white. His tie was a plain navy blue. On the left lapel of the jacket, suspended from a pale blue ribbon with a field of white stars, hung a medal that caught the fluorescent light of the courtroom in a way that was not showy, just present, the way something that has been a fact for a long time is present. His hands, resting on the table in front of him, were mapworks of wrinkles and raised tendon, liver-spotted and large-knuckled, but entirely still. He did not fidget. He did not look up at the judge. He was reading something in the middle distance that no one else in the courtroom could see. The gallery held perhaps 60 people. A dispute over an easement. Roy Dunham's property abutted a county road that the township wanted to widen, and Roy's fence and one corner of his equipment barn sat in the proposed footprint. It was a Tuesday in September, and the air in the 43rd District Court smelled of floor polish and stale coffee, and the faint accumulated ghost of 10,000 prior mornings. The fluorescent panels overhead made everything the color of something slightly wrong. A ceiling fan turned without producing any discernible effect on the air. Cahill had noticed the medal when Roy sat down. He'd said nothing then. He'd worked through the preliminary motions with his usual efficiency, which was the efficiency of a man who found procedural power satisfying in the same private way some men find tidy lawns satisfying. But when Roy's attorney, a young woman named Claire Sato, who had taken the case pro bono and was trying very hard not to show how nervous she was, began to organize her notes for opening remarks, Cahill had looked at the medal again, and something in him had decided. "Counsel," he'd said, "please advise your client that decorative items are not permitted at the plaintiff's table. This is a courtroom, not a parade ground." Claire Sato had stiffened. She'd leaned to Roy and said something low. Roy had not moved. And then Cahill had given his first warning, and his second, and now here they were at the third, which was always the last one. "Your Honor," Claire said, and her voice was doing something complicated, trying to be deferential while simultaneously standing in front of something she understood to be wrong. "My client has every right to wear, counsel." Cahill's voice went to a register below speech. "I am aware of what your client has every right to do. What I am telling him is that in this courtroom, I decide what is appropriate to the dignity of these proceedings. That medal," and here he leaned forward another precise inch, "is a prop. It is a piece of theater. And I will not have my courtroom turned into a stage." Roy Dunham raised his eyes from the middle distance. They were pale blue. Those eyes. The color of a winter sky in the hour before snow, with a quality of depth that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with what had been deposited there over 8 decades of being the kind of person who carries things. He looked at Cahill with the steady, untroubled patience of a man who has seen worse than this and knows the difference. "It's not theater," Roy said. His voice was quiet and unhurried, a low rumble with gravel in it. "It was given to me by the President of the United States. In this room or any other, I'll wear it standing up." The gallery shifted. Not loudly, just the particular human sound of 60 people recalibrating something. Cahill's face did not change. In 11 years on the bench, he had learned to read those gallery sounds the way a sailor reads weather, and what this one told him was that he was being watched in a way that required resolution, not retreat. "Bailiff," he said. The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Dennis Pruitt, who had worked this court for 9 years and who had, in those 9 years, developed a reliable sense for when a thing was about to happen that he would not want to explain to anyone, crossed the floor. He stopped at Roy's side. He looked at the metal. He looked at the old man's face, at those pale blue eyes that absorbed his discomfort without reflecting it back. He reached out, slowly, and unclipped the metal from the lapel. Roy Dunham did not move, did not flinch, did not reach for it. He simply watched Pruitt's hand close around the pale blue ribbon and the gold cross of the metal, and something passed through his face then. Not anger, not fear. Something quieter and older than either of those. The expression of a man who has witnessed desecration before and knows that the appropriate response to it is to remain. The ribbon pulled free of the lapel pin. The gold and enamel cross caught the light one more time as it passed out of Roy's vicinity, and in that moment, as the fluorescent panel above the plaintiff's table washed the bench in its wrong-colored light, the courtroom dissolved. The smell of floor polish was gone. The stale coffee smell was gone. What replaced it was red clay dust and gun smoke and the deep humid heat of a country that was always trying to grow something over the evidence of what men did to each other there. He was 21. He was lying face down behind a dike wall that had been built to manage rice field flooding and was now managing a firefight, which was not what dike walls were for, and they were not good at it. 40 yards to his left, a 60mm mortar crew that had been attached to his platoon at first light was no longer a mortar crew. They were 3 men and a piece of equipment, and the equipment was the only one of the 4 still capable of doing its job. 40 yards to his right, second squad had gone quiet in a way that was different from the quiet of men trying not to be heard. The medal had not been given to him for a single thing. It had been given for approximately 11 minutes of a particular afternoon on a road outside a village whose name he had since read in books without fully recognizing it as the place where he had actually been. The citation described those 11 minutes in the language that citations use. Language that is accurate, but that removes from the event the smell of it, the sound of it, the weight of a man's body when that man has stopped being able to carry himself. What he remembered of those 11 minutes was this. He had gone back 4 times. Each time he had been certain he was not coming back. The 4th time, his left side had been wrong in a way he didn't have the attention to investigate, and there had been a boy, 19 years old, a private named Marcus Dill from Akron, Ohio, who had been shot through both legs and was lying in the road making a sound Roy had not heard a human being make before, and has not heard one make since. He had gotten under Marcus Dill's arms and pulled. He had pulled through 40 yards of a road that someone was very committed to making dangerous, and he had reached the dike wall with Marcus Dill and fallen into the clay with a leg that was not going to be the same leg it had been that morning. Marcus Dill had lived. He was 79 years old now and lived in Tucson, Arizona, and called Roy on 2 days a year, Roy's birthday and November 11th. He called without fail. He had called from hospital rooms and from his daughter's house after his wife died, and once, memorably, from what sounded like a very loud fishing boat somewhere in the Gulf. He always said the same thing at the end. He said, "You came back 4 times. I never knew a man who could do that." At the ceremony, the president had pressed the pale blue ribbon and the gold cross into his palm and said something that Roy had heard with his ears, but not with the part of him that was still listening to Marcus Dill make that sound on the road outside the village. He had stood at attention. He had said thank you. He had thought of the 3 men he had not gotten to in time. He thought of their names now, in the courtroom. The memory receded. The fluorescent light of the 43rd District Court came back, and the smell of floor polish came back, and the ceiling fan continued turning without effect. Roy Dunham sat at the plaintiff's table with his hands still, perfectly still. From the 3rd row of the gallery, a woman named Diane Marsh watched all of this. She was a legal clerk for the township's attorney and had no stake in this case beyond the administrative one. She was 40 years old and had a father who was 76 and had 2 Purple Hearts in a box in his study that he never talked about. She had grown up understanding, in the particular way that daughters of silent veterans understand things, that the silence around those boxes was not emptiness. It was the opposite of emptiness. She watched Roy Dunham's hands. She watched them not move while the bailiff took the medal. She watched the old man's face do that thing, that ancient recognizing thing, and she felt something tighten in her chest that she did not have a precise word for. She stood up quietly, murmuring "excuse me" to the man beside her, and walked out of the courtroom with the practiced low-profile exit of someone leaving for the restroom. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone. She knew a man, her father's friend, a retired command sergeant major named Eugene Potts, who still had connections, and she called him. "Gene," she said, "I need you to listen to me. I'm at the 43rd District Court in Millhaven. There's a man named Roy Dunham in there. They just took his Medal of Honor off his chest in front of 60 people. The silence on the other end was immediate and complete. It stretched for 4 seconds. 5. When Eugene Potts spoke, the voice that came back was not the voice of her father's old friend who grilled at the 4th of July and told the same 3 jokes. It was something stripped down and operational. "Say the name again." "Roy Dunham." Another silence. Shorter this time. "Then, don't go back in there. Stay in that hallway. Don't let them recess, and don't let anyone move him. I am making a call right now." The line stayed open. Through it she could hear Eugene's voice, receding, saying a name to someone else. Then a door, and another voice, and a silence that had the specific texture of a room's attention suddenly concentrating on a single point. She stood in the hallway of the 43rd District Court with the phone pressed to her ear and waited. Inside, Cahill had continued. The easement case proceeded in the efficient way that Cahill ran all proceedings. Roy Dunham sat at the plaintiff's table and answered his attorney's questions in the same quiet, steady voice, and did not look at the bailiff's desk where the medal now sat in a small basket beside a confiscated water bottle and someone's cell phone. Claire Sato was doing her job with a controlled fury that she was careful not to let become visible. The gallery had settled into the particular attentive silence of people who are watching something they are not sure they are supposed to be watching. Cahill was cross-examining a survey map when the doors opened. They didn't open the way courtroom doors normally open, the hesitant inch, the apologetic face, the mouthed sorry before the click of the latch. They opened the way they open when the person on the other side has concluded that the concept of hesitation does not apply to them. Both doors, simultaneously, with a sound that landed in the room like a starter's pistol. 2 Army officers in dress greens came through first and took up positions on either side of the doorway without looking at anyone in the gallery. Behind them, a woman in a tailored civilian suit who had the bearing of someone whose job it was to be in the room before the important person was in the room. And behind her, filling the doorway for a moment before stepping through, a major general. 2 stars. Dress uniform. A chest rack that began at the collarbone and descended in organized rows to the belt line. He was perhaps 60 years old and had the face of a man who was very calm and very angry, which is a combination that tends to clear rooms. He looked at the room. His eyes moved across the gallery. the bench, the plaintiff's table, and found Roy Dunham in approximately 2 seconds. Then he looked at the basket on the bailiff's desk. His eyes held it for 1 moment. Then he looked at Cahill. Cahill had not moved. He was frozen in the specific paralysis of a man who has just watched his assumption of being the most important person in the room get revised by something that walked in on 2 feet. "I apologize for the interruption," the general said. He did not sound apologetic. He walked down the center aisle at a pace that was not fast and was not slow. The polished shoes on the old wooden floor the only sound in the room. He stopped at the bailiff's desk. He looked at the medal in the basket. He reached in and lifted it by the ribbon with a care that was itself a statement, the way a man lifts something that should not have been put down. Then he turned to face the bench. "Your Honor," he said, "my name is Major General Arthur Connell, United States Army. I am here because a phone call reached me 40 minutes ago informing me that a Medal of Honor recipient was appearing in this court and that the medal had been removed from his person." He paused. "I would like to return it." Cahill opened his mouth. "I'm going to ask you to give me a moment," the general said, pleasantly, but in the tone of a man who is not actually asking, "and then you can do whatever you'd like with your proceedings." He walked to the plaintiff's table. He stopped in front of Roy Dunham. Roy looked up at him from those pale blue eyes, and something passed between them. Recognition. Or something older than recognition. The acknowledgement between 2 men who understand a particular kind of cost. The general reached forward and carefully reclipped the medal to Roy's lapel. Then he stepped back. Then he came to attention. The rigid, absolute attention of a man with 32 years of service behind him, and he snapped to the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute that the 43rd District Court of Ohio had ever witnessed in its 90-year history. A salute directed at the old man in the gray wool suit with the pressed white shirt and the plain navy tie. He held it. 1 second. 2, 3, the gallery made no sound at all. Not a whisper, not a shift, not the creak of a bench. The ceiling fan turned in the silence. The fluorescent panels hummed their faint institutional hum. Cahill's gavel was on the bench in front of him. He did not touch it. The general lowered his hand. He turned to the room. "This is Roy Thomas Dunham," he said. "Master Sergeant, United States Army, retired, 3 tours of service. Korea and Vietnam. He served with the 7th Cavalry Regiment and later with the 1st Special Forces Group. He let that land. Silver Star. 3 Bronze Stars, with Valor. 2 Purple Hearts." He paused. "The medal that was removed from his person and placed in that basket is the Medal of Honor. It was awarded to Master Sergeant Dunham for his actions on April 4, 1968, outside the village of Phu Loc in Thu Tien Province, Vietnam, under direct enemy fire, with a wound to his left side that should have taken him out of the action. He re-entered the kill zone 4 separate times to extract wounded soldiers. He brought out 3 men who would not have survived. A 4th man, Private First Class Marcus Dill, Akron, Ohio, he carried on his back through 40 yards of active engagement after both of Dill's legs had been shot through. He stopped. Marcus Dill is still alive. I spoke to him this morning. He asked me to tell Roy something, if I saw him. He looked at Roy. He said, "You came back 4 times. I still don't know a man who could do that." Roy Dunham's hands, still resting on the table in front of him, did not move. His eyes, though, they moved. Down, briefly, then back up. The enemy had a name for Master Sergeant Dunham during his 2nd and 3rd tours, the general continued. Vietnamese irregular forces and elements of the Enva 33rd Regiment referred to him in communications as Bung Ma, the shadow, because he operated in conditions and at margins that their experience told them weren't survivable. And he kept coming back. They couldn't account for him. He paused. I want the gallery to understand something. The medal Your Honor described as a prop, that piece of theater, represents an action that is only awarded in cases where the review board has determined that the recipient distinguished himself through conspicuous gallantry at the risk of his own life above and beyond the call of duty. At the time of Sergeant Dunham's award, there were fewer than 250 living recipients in the United States. He looked at Cahill. He is one of fewer than 100 still living today. The room absorbed this in the way that rooms absorb things that are larger than what they were built for. Cahill had not spoken since the doors opened. His face had traveled through several expressions without settling on one, which was unusual for a man who had constructed his public face with considerable deliberateness over 11 years. What followed happened quickly and with an institutional efficiency that General Connell had clearly planned before walking through the doors. The gallery was informed that an oversight body of the Army's Judge Advocate General Corps had been notified of the incident and would be reviewing the morning's proceedings. The relevant sections of the United States Code protecting Medal of Honor recipients from being compelled to remove the decoration in any public proceeding were read aloud by the woman in the civilian suit, who turned out to be a JAG attorney. Claire Sato sat very still and watched all of this with the expression of someone who has been handed something unexpected and is trying to figure out how to hold it. Cahill received a formal letter of rebuke from the State Judicial Review Board 6 weeks later. There were, additionally, conversations at levels above the district that Cahill was not present for, but whose outcomes he felt in the reconfiguration of certain professional relationships. He continued on the bench. He was quieter in the months that followed, in ways that people who had worked with him for years noticed without fully being able to name. The easement case was settled in Roy Dunham's favor within the week. The equipment barn stood. After the general had concluded and the JAG attorney had finished, and after the room had returned to something like itself, though fundamentally altered, as rooms are after certain things happen in them, Roy Dunham rose from his chair. He was slow about it. 83 years old is slow, and he steadied himself with one hand on the table. He walked to the bench. Cahill looked at him. Roy placed his hand, those knuckled, still hands, flat on the rail in front of the bench. He looked up at Cahill with those winter sky eyes, and his voice was what it had always been, quiet, unhurried, containing no triumph. You've got a hard job, he said. I know that. Courtrooms need order, and you're the one who has to find it. He paused. But there's a difference between the authority of a robe and the authority of what a man's actually done. The robe is lent to you. The other kind, he touched the medal briefly with one finger. You carry that the rest of your life, whether anybody can see it or not. He took his hand off the rail. I hope you find the difference useful. He walked back to Claire Sato and picked up his briefcase and walked out of the 43rd District Court with the measured pace of a man who has been in no particular hurry for a very long time. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon that had turned unexpectedly warm for October, Roy Dunham was eating lunch at a corner table in a diner called Millhaven Family Restaurant that had been operating on the same block since 1961 and made a beef stew that Roy had been eating since approximately 1974. He was reading the local paper. He had the stew and a glass of water and the paper and the afternoon, which was, in his estimation, a complete set. The bell above the diner door rang. A man came in who was wearing civilian clothes that fit him the way civilian clothes fit men who have worn a uniform for most of their adult lives, correctly, but without conviction. He was thinner than he had been in the courtroom, the authority that a robe had lent him taken back and not replaced. He stood at the entrance for a moment, and then he saw Roy in the corner. And the decision he made in that moment was visible from across the room in the way that genuinely hard decisions always are. He came to the table. He stood there for a moment. "I came to apologize," Judge Warren Cahill said. "I'm aware that there isn't a version of it that covers what I did. I've been trying to figure out the right version anyway, and I've concluded that there isn't one, so I'm just going to say it plainly." Roy folded the paper. He looked at Cahill for a moment with those pale blue eyes that didn't need to do anything special to make a man feel that he was being understood at a depth greater than he'd expected. "Sit down," Roy said. He pushed the menu across the table. "The stew is good." Cahill sat. He looked at the menu without reading it. "I looked you up," he said, quietly. "After I read the citation." "Most people don't read the citation," Roy said. "I know." They sat in the particular silence of two men who have arrived, from very different directions, at the same piece of ground. There are men like Roy Dunham at corner tables in diners in every town in this country, men who carry the weight of what they've done in places no one here can picture, who wear it without announcement, who ask nothing of the world but a fair easement ruling and a bowl of good stew. They are not invisible because they hide. They are invisible because we do not know how to see what doesn't announce itself. The only thing required to find them is the willingness to look at a man and ask, honestly, what he might be carrying. If you were moved by Roy's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.